Thank you for appearing before us, Ambassador Powell, today. And also, I'd just like to start with a thank you to you for everything you've done in the past to give a voice to those who otherwise would have been silenced. Your work has not gone unnoticed around the world. My question pulls up on the point you started making around the UN and specifically the Security Council. It has an incredibly powerful potential, but what reform is needed that is pragmatic and feasible to uphold the norms that you were talking about? And what role do you think the UK and its allies can play in any reform? Because I think a lot of people think there should be reform. A lot of us who've worked in foreign services are very frustrated with elements of it. But in terms of meaningful, pragmatic steps that can be taken, that seems to be where the discussion often ends.
Thank you so much. The challenge with any discussion of reform, and I know this is deeply unsatisfying, it's especially unsatisfying to those of us who've sat on the UN Security Council, but is that it comes back to the question of governments and what they are willing to accept, to acquiesce to push. And so there's a reason that there has been no UN Security Council. There's been one UN Security Council reform in the entire history of the UN Security Council. It was in, I think, 1965, and it was broadening the non-permanent membership from 6 to 10. You know, wow, that really, that was a game changer, you know, and in order to secure Security Council reform, as you know, you have to get 2/3 of the UN member states to support it, all 5 permanent members, and it has to be ratified, you know, in the parliaments of those permanent members and of the 2/3. As somebody who tried to push the UN Disabilities Treaty and has pushed the UN Convention to combat discrimination against women, you know, we can't even get a UN Disabilities Treaty through our Senate, where we need 67 votes. So the idea again of UN reform, just for now at least, if UN reform of the traditional, of the statutory kind, feels a little bit remote. But because your question is so central, and I think the premise of it, of the power, the untapped power of this body is key. This gets to just, there is no workaround for the need for the major powers to see their interests as advanced by a Security Council that functions on core issues. This is why I think the French initiative around the veto, around getting a kind of for lack of a better term, gentleman's agreement among the P5 to not use the veto in the case of mass atrocities, something I believe the UK supported. My own government did not come around to supporting that. That was a mistake in my view. I think that, you know, looking at what the Security Council is managing to continue to do right now, it's still sending peacekeepers abroad. There are more than 100,000 peacekeepers in the world in some of the most dangerous areas. But as we all know, they're not properly resourced. We made, in the Obama administration, partnering with Prime Minister Cameron, a real effort to strengthen peacekeeping and get more developed countries to contribute, get more intelligence, reconnaissance, logistic support for those people who put themselves in not only in South Sudan and in Democratic Republic of Congo, but in Mali and Lebanon and places where terrorism is active. So when the Security Council is still working as it is, there are reforms that can be secured, but you really want to see some kind of modus operandi between the US and China and Russia, because the major Security Council reform you need arguably is within those powers that are preventing the Security Council from reaching its promise. Then you can start to look at issues like membership and making sure that the council is more representative. I do think the Zoom, you know, the Zoomification of diplomacy is going to be a benefit. There are, you know, small things, but there are just way too many meetings there's no prioritization within the Security Council, and that's well within the control of the member states and doesn't require any kind of statutory amendment. We are also going to have to look with the US-China standoff, lest we end up in the kind of paralysis we saw during the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. We're going to have to look at peace and security initiatives that occur outside the Security Council as well. And it's no secret that the US and the UK work together very, very closely to combat ISIS. That was hybrid. That was a military coalition that existed outside the UN Security Council, 78 countries, the US and the UK key partners on that. But we also built international law related to ISIS. This is when I was on the Security Council, within the Security Council, because the Security Council, as you rightly say, is the only body with that global reach that can actually build new international laws and require states to turn over information on foreign terrorist fighters, for example, or to prevent ISIS from trafficking in cultural artifacts and so forth. But we couldn't, didn't want to create a military partnership through the UN Security Council because the Russian government was calling every democratic protester a terrorist, and the idea of partnering closely with Russia and China that is locking up Uyghurs and calling all of them terrorists, that didn't make sense from the standpoint of how to fight terrorism effectively. So looking at hybrid models, but also recognizing that some coalitions are going to be built outside the UN for as long as China and Russia's model of governance and particularly model of maintaining stability departs so dramatically from that which democracies believe in.